This is a tutorial on how to do the AP US History DBQ. The DBQ from the past has changed pretty dramatically, so we're going to need to go over all the skills that you need for this particular DBQ. You'll probably hear from a lot of students from last year this is not the way they had to do their DBQ. Just keep in mind that that is accurate, that's true, but the reason for that is because there have been changes to the test itself. So we're really going to need to approach this in a different manner. The overall structure of the DBQ. When you do the DBQ, you're going to have the following things in it. These are the big elements that you get graded on. So it's important that we understand what these elements are and that you're hitting this within the essay. What I'm going to do for you right now is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the overall structure. Then we're going to get into each one of these elements. I'm going to show you examples of each one of the elements and what I would suggest is being a good place of where to put them in the essay. So first off is your thesis statement. This is the first really important part of the essay. Don't get bogged down in the idea that you have to have an introductory paragraph. You don't. You're just going to have a thesis statement. The thesis statement will operate as an introductory paragraph, so you're going to indent it. You're going to do all the elements that I'll talk about with the thesis statement and treat it as an introductory paragraph. But don't get bogged down and think you have to have a full-blown introductory paragraph. You want to use all of the documents in order to have as evidence. Don't get mixed up by this. A lot of students from last year will tell you that I did not require this last year, and they are right. I did not require the use of all of the documents as evidence last year, but that's because there's been a change. Now you have to use all the documents inside of your essay. You're going to use something new. This is something that's different from world history. AP US history students in the past also had to use this, but this is new for you guys because of AP World History did not require you to do this, and it's called outside details. And outside details shows what inspired the writing of the document. Now I know that sounds abstract and weird, so think about it this way for just a second. Let's say it's 100 years from now and you get a DBQ on the War on Terror from 2001 up till 2008. What would you think of, for example, if it was George Bush talking to the Congress, what would you think of as being an outside detail that would have to be there in order to explain George Bush's speech to the Congress about, let's say, invading Iraq? Well, probably you'd be talking about 9/11. It may not be within inside of the document, it's outside of the document, but that definitely inspired George Bush to give that speech to Congress. So that's an example of an outside detail. Another big element is contextualization, and this one's going to be really tough. Contextualization means showing a connection to the broader events or ideas of a time period. I know that sounds really abstract. I'm going to go over it later on in the tutorial, and I'll give you an example of what that means. Just keep in mind that this is a big element you're going to have. Last off is synthesis. We've done a lot of this inside of class. It means making a connection to the events from today. The thesis statement. Thesis statement must answer all parts of the question. And I know you're thinking, well, duh, of course it has to do that. But believe it or not, a lot of people read through these questions really fast. And they don't see all the impacts or issues that the question is asking. You've got to address all those. You have 2 to 3 sentences to do this in. Treat this as an introductory paragraph. Indent the thesis statement. Write the 2 to 3 sentences, move on to the body paragraph. Address the specific impacts of the question. So we've talked about this several times. I'm going to show you this as an example in just a second. Make sure you don't read a question so quickly that you just dive into talking about the subject matter of the question. You want to address the specific issues they are raising in the question. Provide a specific reason. This is really important. A lot of people write thesis statements that refer to issues or simply state an issue without giving a because statement. It is fine in a thesis statement to use the word because. If you are unclear on what I'm talking about, use that word because. It is impossible to finish a sentence on the word because, except for that sentence right there. But that's an exception. Other than that, everything else, if you end with the word because, it forces you into giving a reason. So if you're unclear on how to do that, use that word. If you do feel comfortable doing it, that's fine. You don't have to use the word, but what's important is that you provide a warrant or a reason for the argument you are making. Last up, you've got to provide a specific significance statement. And I would suggest this goes in your third and final sentence of the thesis. Significance statement says, here's the purpose, here's the reason why we're talking about this. Okay, provide that so that it makes your thesis statement sound unique. And last up, don't refer to an issue. Make a direct argument. I'm going to demonstrate this in just a minute with the thesis examples that we're going to show, but a lot of people tend to do this. They say, you know, I'm going to talk about an issue inside of this essay, but that's referring to an issue. It's not making a direct argument. How do you make a direct argument? A direct argument has a because statement. It has a significant statement attached to it. It makes the argument specific. So let's take a look at some examples. So here's about the prompt that you guys are going to be working on. Evaluate if the New Deal was effective in solving the Great Depression. Also explain how the New Deal changed the role of the federal government in the United States. Now, before we jump into the examples, I want you to notice here what I was talking about impacts. Take a look carefully at what this prompt is asking you to do. The prompt is not asking you to talk about the Great Depression. The prompt is not asking you to talk about the New Deal. The prompt is asking you to talk about if the New Deal was effective and how it changed the government. So that's what you have to talk about in your thesis. You have to talk about it in your body paragraphs. Now, if you decide to argue the New Deal wasn't effective, that's fine. If you decide to argue the New Deal changed the federal government in an unconstitutional way, that's fine. But you have got to talk about those two issues. If you talk about anything else that is relevant to the New Deal and the Great Depression, but is not about effectiveness, and it's not about how it changed the role of the federal government, then at that point, that just becomes irrelevant information, and you're not going to get any points for that. In fact, your grade will probably go down. So it's really important whenever you read a prompt, focus in on what you're being asked to do as far as impacts go. So here's a poor example. The New Deal effectively solved economic problems in the United States. It also changed the government in multiple political ways. This led to major changes for the government and society. Okay, so why is this a bad example? Okay, first off, let's take a look at the first sentence. The New Deal effectively solved economic problems in the United States. Gives me no understanding about why. I have no because statement here. I have nothing specific. Now, you don't want to go to the alternate side and start listing off examples. If you were to say New Deal effectively solved economic problems by doing the CCC, that'd be far too factual, far too narrow. What you want to do is you want to provide something that explains to me what you mean by economic problems in a more general way. Let's go to the next sentence. It also changed the government in multiple political ways. Okay, this is what I'm talking about the difference between refer and being direct. What multiple political ways are we talking about? What does even the word political mean here? It is so vague, and it's referring to what you're going to talk about. It doesn't tell me specifically what's the general theme you're going to talk about. And then last up, here's our significance statement. This led to major changes for the government and society. What changes? I have no idea if this is positive or negative tone. I have no idea what specific changes that it's being looked upon here. And even the terms government and society are so vague that this just becomes a vague thesis statement. So how can we change this to make it better? Here's a good example. The New Deal boosted consumerism during a period of economic uncertainty. Okay, look at what I've done here. The New Deal boosted consumerism. Okay, you may disagree with the sentence, and that's fine. But here's the point. The point is we have a very specific argument here. Boosted consumerism, okay, to solve the problem of economic uncertainty. We have specific terms without being factual. This now limits the overall ground so that we are more specific, but it still gives me a lot of room to argue about a lot of stuff because these are not facts. These are general terms. Okay, and it changed the government from laissez-faire to interventionist. Notice, I've talked here now about if the New Deal was effective. I have now said what the New Deal did to government. We moved from laissez-faire to a more interventionist government. And then I end off with a significant statement. This allowed the government to regulate trade between the states. So notice here that I'm giving that long-term impact. The government can now get involved with trade between the states, but I'm doing that in a very specific way. Notice overall, I have not given any facts. The facts go in the body paragraphs. They don't go in the thesis statement. But what I have provided are more specific terms for us to use that allow us to know what the essay is going to be about while still being broad enough to give me a lot of room to talk about. Okay, for your body paragraphs, I would suggest the following model in doing your body paragraph. Now, keep in mind this is a model. It does not mean that it's a rule. So you don't have to follow this exactly. But you need to have these elements, and you need to make sure that you're following overall this general sense. First off, you need a topic sentence that needs to set a specific argument about the documents and evidence. Think of last year in world history. In world history, you guys did grouping. And you might remember last year when you did grouping, a good place to put that would be in your topic sentence. Well, what are you doing with grouping of documents? Well, you're taking the documents and you're grouping them along a common line, right? And so you're giving an idea overall about what the body paragraph is going to be. Now, this year, you're not going to group documents. Okay, that's not what they expect in AP US History, and I don't want you doing that in AP US History. I want you to give an argument. But if you think about it, you're kind of implicitly grouping the documents, okay? Meaning the topic sentence is going to set a specific argument about the documents and the evidence that groups it around a common idea. The topic sentence needs to be significant. Well, how do you make it significant? Tie it back to the issues in the prompt. What is the prompt asking you to do? Was the New Deal effective? How did it change government? Now, you do not have to have every topic sentence address both of those issues. You could have a body paragraph that talks about effectiveness. You could have another body paragraph that talks about the change in government. You want to address those issues somewhere in the essay. They don't need to be addressed in every body paragraph. But the topic sentence must address one or the other. Otherwise, it's just insignificant. So if you give a topic sentence that says something along the lines of, Franklin Roosevelt did a lot of extra actions as a president in the economy, that's not addressing the issues. Sure, it's a topic sentence. Sure, it's significant. But it's not addressing effectiveness. It's not addressing the change in government. Next step, use 2 to 3 documents in each paragraph. This way you're going to cover all of the documents. Remember, by the end of this, you have to cover all the documents. So I would suggest you use 2 to 3 documents in each body paragraph. When you address the documents, very important, you are not allowed to paraphrase or quote the documents. So this again, I've got it bolded down at the bottom. It is really important you get used to this, because this year, if you attempt to paraphrase or quote these documents, you will get no points for the documents. So if you use a document, but it's paraphrased or quoted, you're not going to get that document, and that's going to drop you out of the points that you could get for addressing the documents. When you use a document, here's what you have to do. You have one of 3 choices. You do not have to do all 3. You're going to use the document in one of 3 ways. Either you will provide point of view for that document, meaning an author's attribution and the purpose in writing the document. The audience of the document, explaining the author's audience and the significance of him addressing that audience. Purpose, explaining why the author wrote the document. So again, do not paraphrase, do not quote. You have one of 3 options: point of view, audience, or purpose. Examples. So documents have to be cited by author or title, and then the type of analysis: point of view, audience, or purpose. So here would be a bad example of doing that. Franklin Roosevelt argued that his New Deal would help to solve problems in the economy like a lack of consumerism. Now notice what I've done here. Franklin Roosevelt is, in this particular case, I'm actually giving point of view. Okay, so I start off with Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, I've said nothing about who Franklin Roosevelt is or why his attribution or social status matters. I just say Franklin Roosevelt argued that his New Deal, and then I go in and I paraphrase what he said. This is why you wouldn't get any points for this particular document. All you've done is stated the author's name and then paraphrase what he said. This is a bad example of what we want to do. So here's a good example of what we want to do. The document from Roosevelt was written by the president. Okay, let's stop right there for a second. Notice what I've done here. It's really important. I have said Roosevelt, so now the person knows that I'm talking about that particular document, but I don't stop there. I said it was written by this guy Roosevelt, who was the president. Okay, now I've given the attribution. Now we know what his social status is and why it's going to be important. Promoting his policies to unite a group of farmers, workers, and minorities. Notice carefully here. I'm not providing a paraphrasing in this particular case. It might look like it, but I'm not. I'm giving the purpose. His purpose was to promote his policies in order to create a group of farmers, workers, and minorities into a political coalition. And notice that's the last part of this. Here's our significance. He's creating this political coalition so he can build a way for his future reelection. So notice what I did in this particular example of using the document. The document has the social attribution, president. Okay, now we know how his social status is influencing. Promoting his policies, there is our function, not paraphrasing, but function or purpose of the document. Significance, he's trying to build a political coalition. So what you're doing here is you're providing more analysis of documents, not paraphrasing or quoting of documents. Outside details. Okay, this is really different from AP World History. I know this is going to be a little strange for you guys for a little while. Here's the idea of outside details. You're going to need to provide details and examples from the time period that influenced the document. Okay, so think of the example I gave about George Bush, talking about going into Iraq, being influenced by 9/11. You place these outside details before or after the document. Use the details like a frame to surround the document. Outside details are events, ideas, or people who inspire that document to be written. So here's some examples. Okay, here's a bad example. Roosevelt created a series of programs in the New Deal, including banking reforms, public works, and old age retirement. Okay, this is true. All this is very true that he did this. But notice that by saying it this way, there's nothing specific and it's not leading up to the document. Here would be a better way for us to write this. Roosevelt's efforts to create public works programs and farming reforms through the AAA were intended to unite workers and farmers into a new coalition of voters for an interventionist government. Okay, notice what I've done here. I provided, like up top, public works and programs and farming reforms, but I gave a specific example, the AAA. Okay, then I state what its purpose was. What was the significance? To unite workers and farmers. Now, if you go back to that document I provided before, notice how this is leading up to that. Okay, by providing this example, I can now launch into a document that demonstrates what I'm saying here and that was inspired by Roosevelt's efforts to create these public works programs. So this is how you want to provide these outside details. Provide something specific, lead up to the document. One other thing, though, that I want to say about outside details that students get kind of freaked out about. You're probably feeling like, oh no, now I've got to go to Wikipedia and I've got to look up the date and I've got to look up the numbers and the names of who created this and did it succeed, did it fail, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. No, you don't. When you provide outside details, we know in AP US History, you're given limited time or limited space. This is not a research paper. You do not need to go up and look up all these outside details of the details. What we want is a general description that is significant in 2 or 3 sentences. In fact, in this particular case, the good example is only 1 sentence. You do not have to worry about providing all of these extra details. What you do have to do is make sure that when you describe a program, it's specific and it leads up to the document. Contextualization. Okay, this one's going to be tough, and it's because it's just very abstract. It's difficult to understand. So let's walk through this, and hopefully this will make sense. First off, I would suggest putting the contextualization in the last sentence of each body paragraph. Why? Because think about what usually a last sentence does. It provides a wrap-up to the body paragraph, and it ties into the next body paragraph. By doing contextualization, you're providing sort of this general wrap-up in which you're going to connect to or refer to the big issues of the time period. So you tie the issues discussed in the documents to the broader issues of the time period. This is analysis, and it demands a specific reason. Make the issue specific, but not factual. Give a reason for that connection. So here are some examples. Here's a poor example. Roosevelt created new banking reforms, public works, and farming reforms to solve economic problems. Okay, notice here it's very general. I don't really have anything that's tying back into the body paragraph specifically. I don't have anything that's significant. So how could we make this better? Roosevelt was creating a new interventionist government based upon the Keynesian belief in government spending to regulate business cycles. Okay, notice carefully what I've done here with the contextualization. By saying this, I have said specifically, the government is changing into a more interventionist government. So notice carefully, we've connected right back to that question. Okay, what was the change in government? I've given a very specific but not factual change, the Keynesian belief in government spending, and significance, regulate business cycles. This ties into that general idea of the time period of Keynesian economics trying to regulate the business cycles to solve for the Great Depression. Notice there are no facts here. This is a general argument connecting to the time period about the overall changes that were taking place. So here's a body paragraph review, because I'm sure at this point your head is swimming and you're wondering, okay, I get all these elements, but I'm not quite sure where they go. So here's what I would suggest. A typical body paragraph should have the following: a topic sentence that gives the overall argument. Remember, it has to tie back to the thesis. So the thesis is talking about effectiveness, changing government. So it's got to do one or the other. Okay. Outside detail. A document, and remember, document can be point of view, audience, or purpose. Provide another outside detail that leads into the next document. Again, point of view, audience, or purpose. And then your last sentence in the body paragraph is a contextualization sentence. Conclusion paragraph, synthesis. Your concluding paragraph is not going to do what you typically do in your English essays. In your English essay, a concluding paragraph is a restatement of the thesis, or it's a reconnection to the major arguments, or you're just rehashing over a lot of the things you already said. Here we're going to do something slightly different. Remember, your audience is different. You're writing for a different audience here. You're writing for the AP US History audience. So you're not going to do what you do in your English class. Your audience is looking for this final thing, which is synthesis. Synthesis is a specific connection between the issues of the time period to a current issue. Make that direct comparison. Okay? Just because you provide a connection to something going on today doesn't mean you get the points. You have to make sure that the issue of the past has some kind of direct connection to today. How do you know that there's going to be a direct connection? Again, go back to the prompt. Are you talking about changes in government? Or are you talking about economic effectiveness? Be careful that the two issues are parallel to each other. Okay, and this gets back to what we were talking about right now. Don't just make a synthesis. Make sure the synthesis is direct. Provide a direct statement of significance between the two issues. So here are some examples. First off, let's start off with a poor example. The activist government in the New Deal connects directly to the current federal government's actions of wars in the Middle East. Okay, why is this a poor example? I mean, it's dealing with changes to government. We could even indirectly say that government grew in power just as it's growing in power today. But notice that this specific example is talking about wars in the Middle East. We're not really talking about economic changes with government. We're talking about government foreign policy and government policies when it comes to wartime measures. This is definitely a synthesis, but it's not direct, it's not parallel. You would not get the points for this. Here's a better way of doing it. The activist government, the New Deal, connects directly to the current efforts of the Obama administration to use stimulus spending, here we got Keynesian ideas, to solve inequalities in wages after the 2008 recession. Now, the rest of the body paragraph could either be a positive tone of this, saying that Obama's on the right track with this, just like FDR was, or it could be a negative tone. You can say Obama is crazy, he's going down the wrong path, he should have gone down the path of Hayek, same thing with FDR. That's fine, either way is fine, but notice what's important here is that you're making a direct comparison. We're talking about the activist government of the New Deal with the economy in the 1930s, the activist government with the economy in 2008 recession. So either way is fine, okay? You want to finish up. I just provided a couple of sentences on each one of these cases. You'd want to do a whole paragraph. I would suggest like 5 to 7 sentences explaining what you mean by that synthesis. And that is it as far as the DBQ goes in doing this. So I hope that helps to make sense, and I hope the examples make sense. Look over this a few times. We'll talk about it in class. Hopefully this will help you in structuring that DBQ. DBQ has a lot of moving parts, and I know it's difficult, but this is what we got to get used to doing first at home in the first semester, then second semester under time pressure. Okay, we'll talk more about this in class. Thanks a lot.